Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well and all of that good stuff. Let's talk about video game movies. As far as I'm aware, I have not talked about that many video game related movies on this channel. And there isn't a specific reason for that, I just haven't. But I do think it is a topic that is very interesting for a number of different reasons. Which is why I wanted to do a specific video just all about video game movies. Do we even need them in the first place? And what could filmmakers do to improve any future video game movies? I don't know how well this video is going to go. It's unscripted. I'm tackling this video a little bit like the aspect ratios one I did last year, but it should turn out alright. So, for as long as video games have tried to tell compelling stories with likable characters, there have been pretty much as many film adaptations of those stories, well, at least attempts to try and tell those stories. And we all know that about 99% of the time, whenever Hollywood tries to take something from a video game and put it into a film, it doesn't usually work. And it's only in recent years we've started to see a recurring trend of film adaptations sort of getting there. Now, I do find it interesting because in the mid-2010s, I was starting to think to myself, maybe Hollywood have learnt from their mistakes and they have stopped making video game film adaptations. Because even though in the 2010s we got a few video game movies every now and then, like Prince of Persia and the Sands of Time, Warcraft and Assassin's Creed, they weren't coming out every 5 minutes. They were very, very sparing, which is why I thought back then maybe Hollywood had learned from their mistakes and weren't making as many as they used to. However, in the last 2 to 3 years, there has been a very drastic shift in Hollywood's approach to video game movies. It's a very weird one to explain because rather than doing what I thought they would do about 6 or 7 years ago, they've instead done the complete opposite and are doubling down on video game movies. In the last 2 to 3 years, we've had successful film adaptations of Pokemon, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Mortal Kombat that have all not just done well at the box office, but have also been successful with critics and audiences. And then you have the year we are in right now, 2022. There is currently a film adaptation of Uncharted in cinemas, and it is doing pretty well. In a couple of months' time, we will have a sequel to Sonic the Hedgehog. HBO are currently working on their adaptation of The Last of Us, and there is also an adaptation of Metal Gear Solid with Oscar Isaacs playing Solid Snake that is also in production. Illumination are also working on an animated feature-length Super Mario movie with a very questionable cast.
He's not fucking Italian!
And earlier this week, it was announced that Netflix were teaming up with 2K Games to finally make a film adaptation of Bioshock, my favourite video game of all time. And I still don't know how to feel about that news, considering that specific film has been stuck in development hell for about 10 years now. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird time for video game movies. About a decade ago, it looked like we were kind of in the wastelands of video game movies. Anything we got was either okay at best or incredibly crap. Now, Hollywood seem to be doubling down on it, and we seem to be getting more than ever before. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'll leave that one up to you. At the end of the day, though, it doesn't matter how many adaptations we're getting. The core thing is, are these adaptations good or not? Recently, with examples like Detective Pikachu, Sonic the Hedgehog, Mortal Kombat, etc., we're starting to see a trend of video game adaptations that are starting to get there. They're still not amazing. I would say the best ones we've had so far are probably Sonic the Hedgehog and Detective Pikachu, because they're very enjoyable, and I would say those are some of the best video game movies we've had probably ever. And to be honest, the competition it's up against isn't very strong, but those two films definitely hit something that worked, which I will get onto in a second. But those two films in particular are legitimately good films on their own rights. Now, the main question I wanted to bring up with this video is, do we even need video game movies in the first place? I always kind of thought in the back of my head that that was kind of the point of video games. It was like an alternative medium to telling stories and to being entertained from film. Like, it was its own separate thing, which is why in the past so many adaptations from video games to films don't necessarily work. And you could also say it doesn't work the other way around, because there was a spate during the mid 2000s where we got a lot of video games based off of films, and a lot of those aren't particularly great either. A few of them do stand out as being good and even better than the films they're based on, specifically X-Men Origins Wolverine. The film is not good at all, but the game is legitimately actually a lot of fun, which is why whenever a film adaptation of a video game is announced, I am always rather skeptical. Take, for example, again, the recent announcement of Bioshock being made by Netflix. There is a part of me that really is hopeful for that film, because again, Bioshock is my favourite video game of all time, and to see it turned into a film would be really interesting, especially if someone can nail the art direction and the set design right to make it fit the games. If they can get the tone right from the games, then I think they're onto something. But again, if you look back at the many film adaptations of video games, you will notice that there is a constant trend of the source material kind of being lost in translation. If you're adapting a film into a game, you don't necessarily get that. It's just whether the game is actually good or not is usually the thing that warrants whether the game adaptation works. However, when you're adapting a game into a film, you have a lot more variables to take into account, which is why it kind of always brings up this debate in my head of like, well, they're two completely different mediums that work for different reasons. So let's, for instance, take a look at the 2008 film adaptation of Max Payne, starring Mark Wahlberg. Now, one of the many reasons it doesn't work is because, again, it has that problem of being lost in translation. Because the original Max Payne games, one of the reasons they worked is because they took certain things from 90s action movies like Bullet Time, which was made famous by both The Matrix and John Woo action films, and translating that into a gameplay mechanic that wasn't just a cool thing to see, but also helped you in really tight and tense moments of action. However, when you take something that was made popular in film, put it into a video game, not just as something that looks cool, but as a legitimate mechanic in the game that is helpful and useful, and then take that very thing and then put it back into film, because you're putting the thing that started off in film back into film, and it's been several decades since that thing became popular, it just comes off as cliched a little bit. Hence why Zack Snyder gets so much stick for using slow-mo in his films so frequently, is because it's kind of been overdone at this point. And it's reasons like this that the majority of video game films don't necessarily work. It's because they try to take something from the game and put it in the film, but something is lost in translation. And that thing with Max Payne is a perfect example of that. Plus, there is another thing that video game adaptations tend to do quite frequently, and that's not knowing where to draw the line between faithfully recreating the game on screen and genuinely telling a compelling story with engaging characters. Most of the time you get one of three things that happens when you run into this issue. First of all, the film is so faithful to the game that it alienates audiences that have not played said game. Secondly, the film tries so hard to replicate the game that it doesn't care about story and characters, etc., and kind of pushes them to the side, and all you end up getting is these really half-assed recreations of the game that don't look as cool as you think they would, and it would just be better to play the original game. And then you have the third category, which is a bit of a weird one. It's when a film tries so damn hard to not be faithful to said game, and instead tries with characters and tries with story. But again, you have the opposite issue of alienating fans of the game. The best example I have for this category is Final Fantasy Spirits Within. I actually don't mind this film, and I have a little bit of nostalgia for it. But if you've played any Final Fantasy game, you will know that this film looks and feels nothing like Final Fantasy. There is nothing Final Fantasy-ish about this film other than the title, which is half the reason I think the film didn't do that well when it was released. So yeah, those tend to be the main sorts of issues you get when adapting a video game into a film, which is why the majority of them throughout the years have not worked. However, in recent years, like I said before, I think filmmakers and Hollywood are starting to get it. You have films like Detective Pikachu, Mortal Kombat, and Sonic the Hedgehog that manage to find a nice 50-50 balance between telling a compelling story that is also very entertaining to watch, but also has enough callbacks and elements from the games that is managing to please both sides of the coin. Then you have something like the recent Netflix series Arcane, which I have literally just started and is pretty good from what I've seen so far. And as you may or may not know, that is an adaptation of the video game League of Legends. However, the reason the show works on its own is because it focuses first and foremost on telling an engaging story with characters that you can latch onto, and it is also incredibly entertaining. Plus you have some really cool animation as well. But the reason it does that and focuses on that more than anything means that it can draw in normal audiences that maybe have never played League of Legends. And I would even go as far to say that the show is so engaging and enjoyable on its own terms that I don't even think you really have needed to play League of Legends to watch or understand the show. If you've never played any of League of Legends, I think you'll be fine watching Arcane. I will go as far to say, if you took the League of Legends aspect out of the show, and just took the name away from it, I don't think it would affect the quality of the show at all. You'd still have a really fucking good animated show there. The fact that you're just taking it out is just taking one element out that wouldn't really affect the quality of the writing or the storytelling. It's still going to be a good show regardless. And I feel like that is something more film or even TV adaptations of video games should focus on. Now, with that being said, I don't know what the future of video game film adaptations is going to look like. There is always that aspect of me that will kind of think they are two separate mediums for a reason, and there are certain things you can do in video games that can't necessarily be translated that well in film. That being said, and it's not like either of the mediums are going to go away. It's like, if the Uncharted film is crap, yes, I still have the games to fall back on, and I would rather play the games than go and watch the film. But that being said, because of the state we are currently in with video game adaptations, whether it be in film or TV, there is a little bit of hope in terms of the quality of what is being produced, and also in terms of finding that balance. If it is a video game that lends itself to that format anyway, then maybe. Which is why the idea of an Uncharted film has always sounded so good in a lot of people's heads. However, now that the actual thing is out, you know, the final product kind of, you know, is a bit like, yeah, that's not quite what we wanted. But because the Uncharted games are so cinematic in their approach anyway, you would think it would kind of work perfectly in film form as it is. But then again, you have that debate that you can come back to, which kind of contradicts it a little bit, because the whole point of Uncharted's existence as a video game series was to be the game equivalent of the Indiana Jones franchise, but for games. So making a film out of that game series kind of seems a bit contradictory, seeing that they're just going back to the very medium that influenced it. It's a little bit like the Max Payne thing. It's a weird balance, which is why it kind of sounds like I'm rambling a little bit in this video, because for everything I want film adaptations of video games to do, there is always a part of me of like, well, yeah, but if they could do this, that would also be good. It's a weird 50-50 split. Part of me thinks they should just not bother with video game adaptations, but then when you look at the possibility of like what Arcane is doing, where they are telling just a good story first, and the fact that it's adapted from League of Legends just so happens to be the icing on the cake, kind of makes you think back on that argument and kind of makes you battle with it in your head. It's a weird one, and it's an answer that I don't know if I have. I mean, I'm just one guy with a camera and a microphone. I'm probably not going to have the answer to that. But one thing I do want to do is open this question up to you guys in the comments, because I feel like there is a lot that can be discussed in terms of, first of all, do we even need video game adaptations in the first place, considering the video game exists anyway, so just play the game. Secondly, if they were to continue doing video game adaptations like they are planning to, what is the best way to go about doing them? So yeah, let me know in the comments what you think of the whole thing. Again, I apologise if this sounds like one big ramble, but I just wanted to get my thoughts out there because I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of this topic. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.